So guys, good to be here. Thank you very much. I'm Philip from Project A Ventures. We are a pan-European investor out of Berlin, $500 million in assets under management. And I have the pleasure of discussing pan-European investing with some really nice speakers here. First of all, I want to welcome David Miranda to the stage. Welcome, David. He's a long-time corporate lawyer with Osborne & Clarke, and I guess one of the most, one of the most experienced lawyers from the Spanish ecosystem. We also have the pleasure of having Paloma here. She's coming from Weira. I think it's safe to say the innovation hub of Telefónica. So also a lot of experience in the Spanish ecosystem. Good to have you. And then if it works technically, we also have Bernard joining, Bernard Moon from the Bay Area, I think, if you're dialing in from there. He's the co-founder of Spark Lab Group, investing into startups all over the world, actually, a lot in Asia, but I think he'll also have an interesting perspective on the European space. So welcome, Bernard, too.
Thank you for having me.
And then we have Ben joining. Welcome, Ben. He's coming from Briga, and also European investor with offices, I think, in Paris and London.
Yes.
Good to have you as well. I think with the four of you, we have a lot of different perspectives on the ecosystem. And we're going to start with talking a little bit about Spain and then about the European ecosystem in general. So what I would love to start doing is discuss a little bit where you think the Spanish ecosystem stands in terms of maturity, especially in comparison with other ecosystems in Europe. I think a lot has been going on recently, and things are moving fast. But maybe, David, to start with you, you've been around for at least 20 years already. So where would you say does the ecosystem in Spain stay at the moment, and what's happening?
Yeah, well, I think I'm one of the lawyers that pioneered a little bit the venture capital practice in Spain, because I've been around doing venture capital since, I guess, 2007, 2008, when I advised Tiger Global, who is originally it's a hedge fund, but they set up a venture capital arm, and as you may know, they called him the king of unicorns. So they have invested a lot in American, Chinese companies, Indians, and I started working with them like 20 years, like 13, 14 years ago. Nobody knew. I didn't even knew what venture capital was at that time. But then, with a little bit with as time went by, then I started working and setting up a venture capital practice in my firm. And eventually, I think what is venture capital, startups, the entrepreneurial ecosystem 10 years ago was non-existent, basically in Spain, or almost non-existent. And as of late, everybody knows that there's been a high growth. We have two main hubs in Spain. Barcelona was the pioneer, probably. This is where I'm based, and then also Madrid is catching up quite quickly, and we have created even an environment with investors and reputed investors, Spanish venture capital firms. They used to have small funds. Now funds are getting larger, and I think things generally have changed a lot in the last few years, and we have a booming ecosystem, and we are still far away from other capitals, larger capitals like London, Berlin, and Paris. But I think we have a long way to go, but we are going in the right direction.
And Paloma, what's your take on this? Telefónica is very present also in this ecosystem, has been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is lagging behind still in terms of the other cities or countries that David just mentioned? How far are they ahead, and what needs to happen here so that the Spanish ecosystem keeps up with these other countries?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we have been up and running in Guaira for 10 years now, but Telefónica started with innovation and open innovation even before, because we launched Telefónica Ventures a long time ago. When we started Guaira 10 years ago, we started with two hubs, one in Madrid, another one in Barcelona, mm-hmm. Because we wanted to bet on both cities, and that was a winning bet, I must say, along the years. Well, I think that when we started, there was nearly no one on stage. So it was a very, very small ecosystem, both in Madrid and Barcelona, and the difference now is amazing. It's crazy how it's growing. So, for example, to give you some figures, I think last year it was like 1 billion investment in startups here in Spain. I think by August we reach like 2.8 billion, so this is going to be a record year of investment in Spain. And well, I think that we have a very healthy ecosystem when we talk about the startups, the companies that are starting, and we are starting to get bigger and bigger with the scale-ups. And I think where Spain is accelerating a lot and is getting closer and closer to booming ecosystems such as France. I think France, to give you just the figures, is if Spain was 1 billion last year, France was 5. If Spain was 2.8 till August, I think France was 4 point something. So these stunts are getting closer.
No, it's true. It's getting closer. I think having the luxury of being based in both Paris and London, and very soon Spain, without spoiling the news. It's very important to us to see the differences and the trends between the ecosystems, and obviously everyone is catching up, right? So no one was really starting from the same base, and London was probably a bit far ahead, given the relationship they have with the US, historically speaking, and a flow of people bringing that experience as well into the ecosystem. But nowadays, there's more and more people flowing around, founders getting more experience, repeat founders getting into the ecosystem as well, more money flowing at a European level. That's one of the reasons why we're here, and we've been investing in Spain with Briga since the beginning. So I mean, we officially closed our first fund back in 2015, and we are now have $500 million under management, so growing fast. But Spain was always on the radar for us, and it's been a great journey so far, and a few faces I know very well and have already worked with. So it's always cool to be here, and I'm sure that given the talent pool and the entrepreneurial mindset that you see here, I think it's an ecosystem that's built to last and probably be one of the most prominent in Europe.
And you mentioned serial entrepreneurs. So I think when you look at other ecosystems, for example, London or Stockholm or Berlin, there were these lighthouse companies that produced very significant exits, and then you could see that the second wave of founders basically was coming from these companies. Do you think that's happening here at the moment? If you look at Glovo, Factorial, I mean, there are a couple of companies that have the potential of producing this second wave of founders. Do we think we're at this moment already, or are we even beyond that already?
Yes, well, I think we are exactly at that point in time, and sometimes it feels frustrating because people and especially politicians would like to sort of click fingers and have ecosystems thriving and everything happening. It takes time, right? It takes time to build experience and learning curve, and we can try to compress it as much as we want, but at the end of the day, building a unicorn can't take 6 months. It's pretty much impossible, right? So it takes a bit of time, but now we are at the point where we have all these Glovos and Factorial Deals worlds, all these guys coming back. A few of the people who had actually experienced, unicorn or hyper growth companies in the US as well, coming back to Spain. So, I mean, that movement really sort of starts pumping new energy and new flows into the ecosystem, which is good, right? So, no disrespect to the pioneers at the beginning. It was hard, and you have to do it. And if you think about it, we had these conversations 2 weeks ago. If you step back and look at the US, for example, they really started back and during World War II. That's when the government really sort of started putting money onto the table to sort of help technology thrive, and it took forever, right? So we only look at a lens now where we say, hey, these guys are way more advanced, but it took them 70 years, right? So I mean, what we've been doing in Europe in 20 years is pretty phenomenal.
You mentioned the US, so I want to bring Bernard in. Bernard, what's your perspective? I know that you're investing globally, but looking into Europe and probably Spain specifically, what's interesting for you here? What is the difference in comparison to the US or also to Asia? Why is it even worth it looking into these smaller ecosystems from your perspective?
Well, unfortunately, since I wasn't able to make it out to Madrid, one of my missions was to learn more about the ecosystem, and then do our own study as we are looking to expand especially our accelerator network into Europe. So right before COVID, we were looking at certain ecosystems, such as London, Paris, and Stockholm. And then there were secondary targets such as Madrid and Berlin. So from our firm's perspective, when we look at an ecosystem, we look at obviously the talent base, the maturity of the venture ecosystem, government regulations and policies, and then also just the historical exits.
And have you had a deeper look into Spain in comparison to the rest of Europe, or do you treat it more as, for you, it's basically Europe, it's all of a bit of it the same, and then you focus on different cities, so you don't differentiate too much between the different countries like we probably do because we're just from here?
We do, but like I said, unfortunately, we haven't done like a really deep dive into this ecosystem yet.
Okay, and how do you go about when you look at investing here from the US? Do you think it's important to have people on the ground? I mean, you wanted to be here, but in general, do you plan on opening offices here, or do you think by now, I think fueled by Corona also, you can move into the ecosystems here without having a footprint on the ground?
Well, we do think it's always best to obviously have a footprint and a network at the ground level. That's how we've been active, let's say, in the Swedish ecosystem, where we've done about 5 or 6 investments over the past few years. But you're right, the COVID situation has allowed us to look at other markets that we haven't invested in. Like in the past, I would say 3 months, we invested in markets we never did, such as recently invested in a startup near Venice, Italy. So there has been deal flow that has come all throughout the world that we normally wouldn't look at.
Yeah, it makes sense. I want to pass this on to David. You've been around for a while, and you mentioned that things are changing quickly. How big is the Corona effect from your perspective? I mean, you're also consulting international investors that want to invest in Spain. Is that really picking up now? And do you think Corona plays a role in this, or is it unconnected and it would have happened without Zoom calls also?
I mean, absolutely. I think I remember when the Corona broke out in March last year. I was working in a couple of funding rounds and also an M&A transaction, and everything was stopped. I was 2 months stuck at home without work, and then suddenly, by the end of June, when people realized that this might be good for digital companies because it brought opportunities to the table, so then we started to have a lot of workflow, and eventually during June, July this year has been one of the busiest times in my life working as a corporate lawyer in Spain. So I think there's been a change. I think actually the numbers reflect that because we have more than doubled the investment last year. So we have, I think you mentioned 2.8 million euros, which is huge. When last year we were around 1 billion euros. So there's also a change of mindset because there's a case I know firsthand, which is Factorial, that recently raised $80 million led by Tiger Global, and they didn't even meet. So these guys, they just sent the deck to the number of investors who thought it would be a good fit for the company, and they even received, like, this is something quite unusual, I would say, in Spain. They even received like 4 or 5 term sheets, which is quite unique in Spain because you don't typically find such competitive rounds. And they didn't even have to. Typically, you would have to fly to New York, to London, to raise funds, but they did it everything through Zoom, Teams, video conference. So yes, I think things have changed quite a lot, and I guess it's for good.
And do you think the Spanish market is kind of skipping one step? Because you mentioned Tiger Global moving in, for example. So one would have expected to probably first for the European growth investors coming here and doing the deals, and then later on the US discovering this market. But it sounds like by now it's all global, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have now also success cases like Globo, Cabify, Job and Talent. They have raised funds in growth stages from leading venture capital firms. In the case of Tiger Global, which is one I know also very well because I advised them when they invested in Idealista and also in Atrapalo here in Spain like many years ago. At some point they decided they no longer look into Europe, they were focusing in Asia and the United States, and then eventually they just came to Europe, they came back to Europe and they are investing not only in Spain, this is their first investment in more than 10 years, but they are also investing very heavily in other European startups because now in Europe generally we are having nice companies. Valuations are probably a little bit lower than what they find in the United States, so they have big opportunities to do deals generally in Europe, right?
Yeah. And Ben, how do you think about that? I mean, coming from being a European investor, now having to deal, I mean, first of all, going into the different ecosystems like this one here, but now directly having to deal with the US funds. So, I mean, are you up for the competition, or like what's your differentiator? How do you manage to be even earlier in these markets?
That's why I go to the gym every day, right? Just to be able to compete with the US guys. But more seriously, I think, it's a matter of doing what you do best. And I think that US investors can bring a lot to the table. But as Avi said, probably a bit later stage, obviously. I mean, having your feet on the ground at the beginning, although a lot of stuff happens through Zoom, you still have, I was grabbing a beer with a founder last night, and it's a bit of a different feel, and you can really, especially in the tough moments, because it's always a bit of a roller coaster, right? So when it's good, but when it's bad, you need to be here and support, and having that physical presence is important. So on the very early stage stuff, I suppose that local Europeans can still do a lot of heavy work, and therefore be part of the conversations with the US guys. Then when it comes to later stage, well, once again, there'll probably be a few of them, a few Europeans, and we start seeing a few of them being able to compete. A lot of them start having operations over there as well to sort of bridge that gap between the US and Europe, because ultimately, if you want to be massive companies as of today, you need a foot into the Western world. Well, up until the US savaged the relationship with Europe and the submarines and everything. So we'll see. Maybe we'll go to China next time, and then we'll build the bridge on the other side. So it's always evolving, but it's I think there is space to be building the right things. And we looked at the numbers and the performance of the sort of top decile local European funds, and they're thriving, right? So I mean, all of us are going.
So do I get it right that part of your strategy is going a bit earlier and also being more on the ground? So is it still a differentiator if you can be here as opposed to the other guys dialing in from the US?
I think you create a bit of a different relationship. Like it's basically exactly when you're dating, right? So maybe, I mean, if you're an American and you date from far away and you have nice offices with a view on the bay, it's cool and it looks amazing, and you can definitely bring value to the table with your experience with other companies. I know that at Briga, we're all founders, and being on the ground and being able to spend this time with the other entrepreneurs we back and we try to help them grow, I think it brings a lot of value, and we're very much recognized for that. So everyone has his own value proposition, and there's place for everyone. I mean, when you invest 2.8 billion a year in Spain only, I can't believe it's going to be just 2 or 3 people. So plenty of space.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And Paloma, from your perspective, would you say it's a good thing that so many international, not only European but also US investors are coming to Spain now? And would you, or do you think it's a bit of a shame that there's not? We had that in the panel before, that there's not more Spanish investors being able to follow on, and the ecosystem is being overrun is probably an exaggeration, but there's a lot of outsiders coming in. Mm-hmm. Would you think it's a bit of a shame, or is that rather a good thing for the ecosystem?
Well, I think it's good for the ecosystem that we add diversity, so that we add US investors that have big pockets entering the country and helping companies to scale. But in fact, I think that things are moving here in Spain and are changing. There is a gap for later stage investments. And in fact, here in Telefónica, what we have done is to move forward, and we have made a huge bet from corporate VC, and we have anchored a new fund from Key Fund that is Leadwind, and we have inserted like 70 million euros for a later stage, for a Series B fund here in Spain, because we believe that there is this place that a lot of international investors, a lot of American investors are taking advantage of. But I think that there is an opportunity, and we wanted to play in this game for sure.
And what would you suggest to a Spanish founder? When should they bring international investors in? Is there a reasoning that they should early on probably have more local investors and then starting Series A European one, later on a US? Or would you say by now there needs to be a good fit between the founding team and the investor, and the rest doesn't really matter?
I think it's very important to open up the conversations. Well, it's maybe not too soon, but starting from Series A, but it depends a lot on the local markets and the markets that you are targeting. So if you are trying to address the United States arena, maybe you should start the conversation sooner. I think that to raise a Series A here in Spain, there are a lot of funds and a lot of people that have the experience that can help a lot of companies. Well, I have one company in the portfolio that is VoiceMod, that I think that they did an amazing fundraising. What they did is they had amazing numbers. That's for the start.
That helps.
It helps a lot to face the negotiation. And what they are a gaming company. They are a voice modulator for gamers. They found this niche in changing the voices of teenagers when playing Fortnite. And well, it's a huge business, I must say. And what they did, they got letters of intent from several investors, but they want to talk to Bitcraft, that is the leading esports and gaming fund all over the world. So this is you need to know the ecosystem. You need to know where is your place, and you need to target the people that can really help you to move the step forward. And normally they are outside of Spain.
Yeah, makes sense. Ben, maybe handing the same question to you. You being one of the European investors, what is your value proposition when you talk to Spanish companies early on? So why would they take you on board and not someone, for example, from the US, who they could argue can follow on later on, right? I mean, when we talk to ventures out of Berlin, we hear it very often by now that they want to have investors in who can do follow-on rounds for a very long time. And they want these players in the cap table early on. So how do you react to this, and where do you focus in your value proposition, arguing that it could make sense to have you on board early on?
Well, it's as I was saying earlier, there's a bunch of factors that we put on the table. I think, as I said, first of all, at Briga, we're all founders, and that's a big thing, right? And obviously, when you talk to other entrepreneurs, it brings some different perspective to the table, and that's a major differentiator, and that would work anywhere in the world, right? So that's an easy one, and that's also why we've been able to scale outside of France, UK, Spain, and tomorrow other countries, because that's how we approach things. Second one is we've been lucky enough to grow pretty quickly, and we closed our very first fund back in 2015, and we already have reached $500 million under management. So as of now, none of our founders have suffered from lack of capital on our end. So that's competing with the US as well, and being able to raise as quickly as the other guys, to be in the loop and be able to support. And then understanding Europe as well. I think when you're an early stage fund from the US, the real understanding how do you scale in Europe isn't easy. And I'm not saying that all European companies scale in Europe. Some of them go straight to the US, and for some of them it makes sense to have a very early on US investor on your cap table. But if your play is a European play, that's one of the reasons why US companies usually come over and buy a local player, because they don't know how to fucking deal with this, right? Yeah. So having someone who knows that, and who can speak English, French, Spanish, knows the ecosystem, can introduce you to people, that's a different value prop to a lot of founders, and a lot of them recognize it, I think.
Yeah, I got it. Sure. I think perfect transition to Bernard. So how much of your value proposition is helping European founders to move into the US? Because from our perspective, that's something that I think a lot of founders will want to do at some point, because it's such a huge market. So is that how you position yourself, saying that we can be in there early on to facilitate this?
Yeah, that's definitely our positioning in terms of helping startups enter the US market or key Asian markets. So that's what we've done for companies such as LifeSum, which is one of Europe's leading fitness and wellness apps based out of Stockholm. So we actually help them with their US entry. And then some of our other investments, whether it's in the UK or Israel and other sort of scattered locations.
Got it. And
But, oh, go ahead.
sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think given the time is running out very quickly, I thought it would be great if we could spend the last minutes on valuations, because usually I think they reflect very well what we've all been discussing, how the ecosystems are thriving, really. So, Bernard, to follow up on this, from your perspective, being like from all of us, I think most global, how do valuations in Europe compare to what you see in other geographies?
Well, I think overall, globally, the valuations are heated, driven by the various tiger clubs and other hedge funds that have been moved into this late stage space. And then that's obviously increased the valuations even at the lower rounds. So going back to the discussion before, we just sort of see it as a trend backwards from 7, 8 years ago, when a lot of the hedge funds and private equity funds went into late stage venture. And to win the deals, they basically just priced up. I think that's just another cycle recently with the Tigers, the Cotus, the Mavericks, and other hedge funds that are doing it. They'll overpay. So I would say for the European, the mainstay VC funds is to sort of just stay the course. Because I do think, maybe I'm being a little pessimistic, but you'll see a pullback also within the next year or two, when a lot of these startups have been overvalued and some of the investors have overpaid. Not all, but I do, some of them do think the valuations are a bit lofty.
Yeah. David, what would you say to that? I mean, you see a lot of deals going on, and you mentioned that you work with the US guys a lot.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think what he was saying is completely right. So basically, valuations are, I wouldn't say skyrocketing like they are in the US or in China, but valuations are getting higher. There is more competition. There is a lot of liquidity in the market. Also, the effect of what we were talking about, funds like Tiger Global, who in negotiating a deal, 20 million plus valuation doesn't move the needle. So basically, they are playing in the major league, so it doesn't change their return. So they don't have any problem and they can compete because they have deep pockets, right? So, yeah.
And Ben, for us being European investors, how much of a problem is that? Because I mean, they can probably overpay a little bit, which changes valuations for us, right? So how much of a problem do you think this is? And do you also believe, like Bernard, that there will be a correction in the next years going forward?
Well, starting with this, I think there's no such a thing as a perfect market, right? Like, it doesn't exist. And so as of now, like in any asset class, there's more liquidity than amazing projects, probably. Therefore, prices like a stock exchange or real estate may be a bit overpriced. That's what it is. But the wheel will spin. So if you're here for the long run, you'll see valuations come down at some point. So that's for one part of the answer. The other one is what you do in the meantime, right? So in the meantime, I think you have to be. That's what we do at Briga, at least. Much more demanding on the capacity to build a huge business, right? I mean, not that we didn't do that before then, but sometimes you could fall into look, it's a cool company, I'll do it. I think these days, with the price you pay and without proof that exits at that level in Europe exist, because just bear in mind that we don't have a Nasdaq yet, so it's not there yet. Then you have to go for the home runs, but even more so than before then, right? Before then, you'd had a bit of a European angle where you could do smaller companies, pay them cheap, and do a sort of 5 to 10x on reasonable valuations. Yeah. Now, if you pay US prices, you have to go for US exits, and therefore make sure that the teams and the projects you back really have that, that in their DNA.
Yeah, makes sense. So, since time is running out, I want to give the last question to Paloma and ask her for. What are you wishing for the Spanish ecosystem in the context that we just described for the next years? What needs to happen so that this ecosystem can really thrive?
Well, I think that it's already happening. So it's a question of rinse and repeat cycles. So we are seeing, as Ben was saying, we are seeing more and more entrepreneurs that have made it once, have gone through the way and are helping others. We have experienced C-levels that went with other founders, and it's already happening. Well, I think that I do not want to get very messed with that, but I think that we need a bit of regulation, maybe support and less bureaucracy here in Spain. I think that the government is moving to help us, but I believe that David would be better to answer that question than a corporate.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about the startup bill because it's very politically incorrect, my opinion. So, and the High Commissioner is around here. I don't want to step into him.
That's some really great last words, because I think your opinion, everyone can get it here. We'll all be around. You can talk to David one-on-one, and probably he'll share a bit more.
Okay.
I want to thank you all so much. I think it was really a fast run-through, obviously, through a big topic, but we have had different perspectives here. We had the US, we had Europe, we had a corporate VC, and we had an experienced lawyer. So thank you for sharing your opinions. I think we'll be around, and if you have questions, then feel free to talk to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.